recipes for technical trading success in Cook's Kitchen.
What's a Google Sprint, and can it save IBM? IBM is doing something new and cool called Design Studios to take their 380,000 employees and make them more nimble. We're going to look at the success of Google and see if IBM can replicate it. As you know, I like to tell stories about markets and companies and business and connect the dots for you. Hopefully we learned something new. I think today will be no exception. Back in June, I wrote a report for Zacks Confidential about big economic disruption. I wanted to look at the confluence of big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics, especially because of this report that I highlight in the beginning by Oxford and Citigroup, where they're looking at the future of work and basically saying that 47% of U.S. jobs are at risk due to automation over the next 2 decades. And actually, the numbers are much more extreme for China and India, where as many as 75 to 80% of jobs are at risk because of automation. So that's where big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, all these exponential technologies, so to speak, come in and are changing the nature of work. Something you really got to focus on. In that report, I said, hey, if you're going to play the future out 10, 20 years, you definitely want to own companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and IBM, because they are going to be involved on the bleeding edges of big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics. The age of automation, so to speak. All right. So moving on, what's a Google Sprint? Well, let me show you this book first. This is a book I'm reading right now by the guys from Google Ventures. If you don't know what Google Ventures is, I'm going to show you in a moment. It's basically the venture capital arm of Google, where they're investing in like over 300 companies. And the sprint is a design process. It's how to get things done quickly, how to take a concept and incubate it quickly and get some kind of rapid innovation or at least iteration of the concept, maybe turn it into a product inside of a week. Now, the whole idea of a Google Sprint is not that you need to have a finished product built and to market, because you can't do that in a week-long process. But it's about what you learn along the way. So you've got an idea, you test it, you're building a prototype, and then it circles back to new knowledge, even if it's not a prototype, a product that you're taking to market. It's just a prototype that you can test. So here is their map of the 5-day process. Or their schedule, rather. And you can read more about this in the book, but the basic idea is that you have this set schedule of how you do things every day, and these aren't 12-hour days either. But by Friday, you're testing your prototype. And some of the principles are here. You work with a small group, 7, 8 people. Google Ventures has found that 7 is sort of an ideal number. 12 would be too many. And people who want to work together, engineers, designers, developers, people that want to work together on an idea, and they're given that deadline to be able to test a prototype by the end of the week, whether it's software or a physical product or maybe just a new concept. But the main idea is that they don't have to build it all at once. Oh, and they get sort of sheltered, right? They're put in that room, no phone, no regular work email, no distractions, so they can focus for the 7 or 8 hours a day that they work. All right, so where has this worked? Well, one of Google Ventures' companies is a company, God, it's a tricky name. I always forget the name. We'll come back to it. But they make the relay robot. This one's called Dash, but I wanted to give you this picture. This robot was really built using a Google Sprint process. And this is the one that's used in hotels, a lot on the West Coast. It can deliver a toothbrush to your room, so to speak. So Relay was the first one. This one's called Dash. And, so Google Ventures has all these companies, and they're teaching them this process of rapid innovation. Before Google Ventures started using the process a lot, the guy who wrote the book, Jake Knapp, this is how he came up with Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts was invented in the concept was invented in 3 days. He was over in Europe meeting with some designers and developers that he only had a few days to be with, and they wanted a solution. They were thinking about video conferencing. They wanted a solution, and in 3 or 4 days, they hammered out what became Google Hangouts. All right, moving along here. So who is Google Ventures? I told you about them already. They invest in 300 companies across life sciences, cybersecurity, transportation, AI, and robotics, too. You know some of the names: Uber, Nest. Flatiron is a data platform for oncology, cancer research. Foundation Medicine has gone public. HubSpot has gone public. Savioke is the name of the company that makes the relay and dash robots. All right. What is design thinking? So you may have heard of a company called IDEO. This company was formed in like 1990. Gentleman, I believe his name is Tim Brown. And design thinking is about creating products, from a designer's point of view. What goal are we trying to achieve? What problem are we trying to solve? How beautiful or aesthetically useful, pleasing do we want it to look, feel? So, I think about the way Apple designs products. They have a vision in mind, not just of what's the utility of this product, but, what is the beauty of it, so to speak. So that's the idea behind design thinking. Obviously, artists can really relate to this. How well can engineers relate when they've just got to write the software or build the model? Well, there's a lot of crossover there. When you think about cars and design, design thinking is embedded. So I just wanted to show you Tim Brown, is considered sort of the modern father of design thinking, and so he talks about a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and their requirements for business success. Those are actually 3 very important things. He's bringing together, what are the needs of people, not just is it ergonomic or whatever, but then what can we do with the technology, and then does it solve a business problem that's actually going to make somebody money? All right, moving on here because we're going to get to IBM in a minute. Now, so this is why Google's so fascinating. I'm going to talk about. I mentioned that the 4 companies I said you want to buy for the long term to be involved in big data and automation and AI and robotics are Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and IBM. But I'm only talking about 2 of those companies today, Google and IBM. Microsoft and Amazon are interesting, but Google is doing incredible things on several fronts, and I'm going to show you a couple more. And IBM is sort of in that position of, can they reinvent themselves again? They reinvented themselves from a hardware company to a services company, to a software company. Now, they've got to take it to another level in sort of the open source world. All right, so one of the best books I read in the past year, Bold, by Peter Diamandis, the father of the X Prize, and Stephen Kotler. They talk about Google because Peter is friends with Larry Page in terms of Skunkworks and Google X. Now, so what's Skunkworks? Skunkworks was something that Lockheed Martin developed in the 40s to innovate quickly. So this is really where the whole idea of the sprint comes from, is what Lockheed Martin was doing 60 years ago. So they took small teams off campus and gave them big goals with lots of freedom to design. And what were the results of that? Some of Lockheed's best aircraft designs, that will stand the test of time. Skunkworks, the funny name comes from the Moonshine Factory and a comic strip. And I'm not sure why they did that. But so it worked for Lockheed Martin. So Google adopted it for Google X. Now this is not Google Ventures. Google Ventures is their venture capital arm. You know about the companies, lots of transparency. Google X is like the top secret lab for Google that's located, I think, within a mile of the main Google plant. And Google X is doing their own, top secret R&D. Now it's just called X, just like Google Ventures is just called GV. So it's headed up by a guy named Astro Teller. That's really his name. He is the grandson of Edward Teller, one of the inventors of the H-bomb. And he's called the captain of moonshots because he and Larry Page decided they didn't want to just do ordinary things. They wanted to go for moonshots. So that lab was started up in 2010. to work on the autonomous car. We know they're doing that. They're working on, space exploration, AI, life extension. But rumors are flying around that they're also working on a flying car. So that's the latest rumor out of Google X. All right, now let's get to IBM. Whoa, here's the revenue picture for IBM for the last 4 years. That peak you see in the first quarter of 2012, that's $107 billion in revenues. And it's just been a sliding slope down here. They're going to do about $80 billion this year, and they're going to be flat next year. About another $80 billion are the analyst projections. So when do things really turn up for IBM? Well, maybe they can get some leverage out of Watson. Here's Serena Williams talking to Watson. Watson is obviously their cognitive analytics, they call it. IBM talks about going from this era from predictive, business intelligence with data to predictive analytics to now what they call cognitive analytics, where they're taking big data and, Watson can win Jeopardy and that kind of thing. So does IBM have a great future with cognitive analytics? Some analysts think so. But here's what they're doing with design thinking. They invested $100 million in early 2014, about 2 years ago, to develop these design studios where they have smaller teams of designers and engineers, carrying the business forward and innovating. And then also, finding new solutions for customers with something like Watson or something like Bluemix. I don't know if you've heard of Bluemix before. By the way, this photo is, this is of their partnership with Jaguar Land Rover. They created a sort of a virtual showroom. And what this woman is doing is she's able to interact with the screen and open doors and view the car, 360 3D just by moving her hand. And here's the control panel. So this is the sort of design thinking solution that IBM came up with for Jaguar Land Rover. All right, this is an article by Liz Stinson from January of this year. She writes for Wired. And so she's talking about, what is IBM up to? Where are they going? Well, she says, for going on 4 years now, IBM has been working to reinvent itself as a design-led business. In 2012, they employed one designer for every 80 coders, programmers, developers. Today, that ratio stands at 1 to 20. By the end of 2016, the company hopes to narrow it to 1 to 15 designers to coders. So that's the idea, bringing designers and I'll call them coders, developers, engineers, since I'm not one, and I want to be broad with that group, the people who create software and those kinds of solutions, with the designers, getting that ratio right so they can create the next best solutions for their customers. And why would this be so necessary? Well, I'll get to Bluemix in a minute. So here are the principles of IBM's design thinking. Simple: a focus on user outcomes, multidisciplinary teams. There again, that's your engineers and your designers. And then restless reinvention. Okay, everything is a prototype. Listen, learn, correct course. Okay, so here's Bluemix. Bluemix is a platform where, and they're making, part of it open source. Developers can come on and create their own apps, right? And not just, the apps on your phone, but we're talking about enterprise applications too. So Bluemix is the development platform for, software on the innovation frontier. And, so you think about IBM's businesses with Watson and Bluemix. These are, education-intensive products and businesses. So they require, more education and experimentation internally for IBM teams, and then outwardly how they're helping customers use them. Okay, so I think I covered all my slides there. Hope I gave you a good idea of what Google is doing from, internally, the Google we know, externally, Google Ventures, and then deep internally with Google X. They're using these advanced, sprint concepts. You can call them agile or lean, whatever, but they're incubation and innovation processes to get things done quickly and get the best ideas out of their talent. So IBM is learning that they've been applying this for a couple of years now, but for them to take their 380,000 employees and advance the company, they've got to develop these agile processes too. And I think they're doing a good job. So Google, IBM Design Studios, they call them. Design Studios, sometimes they call them labs. But I think that they're up to something good and necessary if they're going to turn it around. Meanwhile, you still want to own Google for the long term. All right, I'm Kevin Cook. Thanks for joining me in the kitchen.